Okay, so a little bit of luck, everyone can see my PowerPoint. Um, so this is a webinar on the topic of things that every startup founder can do to improve their chances of success. It's a part of the Startup On-Ramp Female Founders program, which we're delivering with support from the Queensland Government. So I'd just like to acknowledge that this program is supported by the Advanced Queensland Initiative, and we're very privileged to have the support to deliver this program across all of Queensland, including a major focus on supporting female founders in regional Queensland over the next 18 months. So I'd also, before we get into the presentation, like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting today and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So my name's Colin. I've, as I said, worked with a large number of startup founders. I did the tally a little while back, and over the last 8 years in running Startup On-Ramp, I've worked with over 2,000 startup founders. And it's been a real privilege to see some of the journeys that a lot of those entrepreneurs have been on. I put up here a few of the organizations that I've been involved in over the last 20 or so years. And I kind of put them in three groups: startup programs, which includes accelerators and programs like Microsoft for Startups, which support startups globally. Universities, I've spent a lot of time working in the kind of deep tech space, and also funds, and then worked with a number of startups in an ongoing capacity, either as an investor or in an advisory board. So we're going to start off talking about startups and what they are. I'm going to start with a short definition, which is that a startup is a young, high-growth company that's using technology and innovation to serve a large global market. This is a definition developed by Startup Oz, which at the time was Australia's leading peak body for the tech sector and startup sector in Australia. I'm going to show you a little chart here that kind of illustrates graphically where startups sit. So the red box at the top of this is where we think startups sit, and it's a pyramid that shows on the horizontal axis the number of companies, and on the vertical axis the potential value of those companies. So when any company starts, it's got no value. We all know that. But there are some kinds of companies that at the bottom of the pyramid are small businesses and will always be small businesses. They tend to be population servicing. They tend to deliver kind of, services delivered one-to-one by the person or the people that are in that business. They're really important because they create a livelihood for a large percentage of the Australian population, but we don't expect them to become the next Google or the next Facebook. As we go further up the pyramid, we see businesses that are focusing on modest growth, and they tend to be domestically focused. Then high growth potential, these are the ones that are focused nationally or globally. And then at the very top of the pyramid, extreme growth potential. So these are the ones that from the very beginning are what we call born global. The potential value on the vertical axis, it doesn't really matter very much because we're talking about businesses that are at the very start of their journey. But I think it's interesting to think at the beginning of the journey, what kind of business am I setting up to build? None of these are right or wrong, so we're not telling you that you have to do any one part. But for this webinar, we're going to focus on businesses that are up near the top half of this triangle. So a nice example of a highly scalable, growth-focused startup is this one called Jelly Bean. There's actually one of our alumni from our Female Founders program that we ran last year. And the founder, Vula Fronis, is one of those entrepreneurs that had a vision for transforming the way organizations manage and communicate with their staff. And so Vula has a background in working with people-facing businesses. And so she identified an opportunity to build a software product to let those businesses manage their staff and give them feedback in real time, really efficiently. And so Jelly Bean is the product, and it's an excellent example of, I think, two things. One is a product that can scale globally. So the opportunity for a product like this is global, and it's really massive. So if this company is successful, and it's certainly on a good trajectory that looks like it most likely will succeed on scale, then this is an opportunity to build a really serious business. So back to the pyramid, this is right near the kind of top half of that pyramid, maybe the top quarter. The other thing that Jelly Bean, I think, is a good example of is a founder who's got deep domain expertise. So Vula has a long career and a lot of experience in running people-facing businesses. So she understood the problem really intimately, and she was able then to have some insights that allowed her to develop a product that really made sense to solve the problem that her target customers are having, which is how to manage their staff. So let's spend a couple of minutes talking about why to do a startup. The first answer, and the cheesy one, I guess, is that you can make a lot of money. This is true, but I find generally it's not a good reason to start a startup. It tends to be a happy byproduct if you happen to start a startup that goes extremely well. Having said that, having the Ferrari in the driveway is maybe not a bad thing. Probably the biggest reason that people start a startup is to have impact in the world or in their society, or to have to do something that moves the needle beyond just selling a product and making a few bucks. So this is another example of a company that we've been working with at Startup On-Ramp. It's called Resilience Design and Build, and it's founded by a successful entrepreneur, a lady called Siobhan Pearson, who decided that we need to do some things to accelerate the adoption of clean energy in Australia. And so what they're creating is a highly portable and scalable solar powered charging station for electric vehicles. So there's going to be a massive need for products like this over the next years and decades. So this is, again, an opportunity to have an impact in the world, in this case, focusing on the environment. The third reason, and one that tends not to get talked about quite as much to start a startup, is that as a country, we really have to get better at doing things that aren't just relying on the resources sector. So this is a cartoon that I quite like. It was created by Peter Lewis at the Newcastle Herald, and we're sharing that with his kind permission. And I guess it makes the point that, we've been really good at digging stuff out of the ground and selling it, but if we want Australia to be a prosperous economy in the longer term, we've really got to come up with some other strings to our bow. Really briefly, I just want to show you something that's the only science that we're going to talk about in this presentation, and it's a thing called the economic complexity map. It's a thing that's produced by Harvard University on a regular basis, and it visually maps the economic outputs of a whole bunch of countries, 133 countries, in fact. And what it does is it shows the proportion of our export income that comes from different types of goods and services. So you can see this one for Australia. We have a lot in iron ores and concentrates and coal and petroleum gases and gold, and as you might expect. The important bit of this isn't just to illustrate what we produce and sell. It's that the science behind this has shown that the long-term economic success of a country can be tied to the diversity or the complexity of its economic outputs. So for Australia, which in this instance was ranked 91st out of 133 companies by economic complexity, that should be a red flag. So for all of us who are interested in living in a country that's economically prosperous in the longer term, especially if you've got kids and you want them to have good opportunities to do interesting stuff, this is kind of important. For comparison, this is the economic complexity map for South Korea, which is ranked number 8 in the world by complexity or economic diversity. And so you can see immediately the very obvious differences in the outputs and the export income that's generated by South Korea, ICT, integrated circuits, transport, machines, office machines, cars, a little bit in the resources sector, but a lot of value add and technology focused output. So that's probably enough on that. I thought I'd spend a couple of minutes just talking about what successful startups look like in the very beginning. And Maren will have some more specific thoughts on some of these points that no doubt she will share. But I just want to talk about a couple of them fairly quickly. And the first is, what kind of ideas make successful startups? So I like to think of startup ideas as fitting in two broad categories. So if you're like me and you like Venn diagrams, here's a nice Venn diagram. You've got the set of all things that sound crazy, and then another set of all things that are in fact a good idea. And what we tend to find with startups is that you can intersect these two sets in this Venn diagram, And if you look at the intersect, it's a really interesting place because what we see is that most failed startup ideas are in fact good ideas, but they don't really sound crazy at first. They sound kind of like, yeah, that would work. And this means that they're often a self-evidently good idea. And being self-evidently good is a real problem because it means there's a very high likelihood that a lot of other people have had either that idea or something pretty similar to it. And so what you tend to find is that the startups that end up failing or growing really, really slowly tend to be the ones where the idea was fundamentally sound, but really obvious. And so there are a lot of people that they're competing with directly. In contrast, the startups that tend to be successful and grow really fast tend to be the ones where it is a good idea, but it really didn't look like a good idea at the very beginning. In fact, it sounded a little crazy. And so the successful startup ideas that are, in fact, a little bit crazy, but a good idea are the ones that I encourage people to try and think of and to come up with rather than defaulting to self-evidently good ideas. And the reason I mentioned Vula earlier as an example of a founder that I would back any day of the week is that it's a good example of someone who had a deep insight into building a company where it wasn't obvious what the right solution is. If we think about international examples, you can think of companies like Airbnb, where today Airbnb is a multi-billion-dollar business, and everyone thinks, yeah, of course, you'd use Airbnb next time you travel. But when they started, nearly everybody looked at that as an idea and said that really is a crazy idea. Nobody is going to let a stranger stay in their house by renting it out on some website in order to make a few extra bucks. It's just not going to happen, at least not on any kind of large scale. And of course, if you fast forward to today, it's happened on a very large scale. So I think this is an interesting framework through which to test your own ideas and just see where you think they sit in this Venn diagram. The other thing I'll say about ideas is that it's really important to make sure you're working on a hair on fire problem. And so we use this term hair on fire to indicate a problem that your customer really feels acutely. So you imagine your customer has their hair on fire and your product or whatever your offering is the bucket of water that's going to put that fire out. So it's an interesting thought experiment to think, well, okay, can I convince myself that the problem I'm solving for my target customer is genuinely a hair on fire problem? You might also hear people talking about painkillers versus vitamins. So you want to be solving a real pain point where your product is the painkiller rather than offering something that's a vitamin. So it's a distinction between really, really must have or really, really strongly want to have versus kind of nice to have, but could do without it. The last thing I want to say about startups is that, and again, this is kind of a mental model. It's helpful to think of a startup as a temporary organization. And I'm going to quote Steve Blank here, who's written a lot of books on this topic. And he describes it as an organization designed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. So if we were starting a cafe or an accounting firm, we don't need to search for a business model. We pretty much can predict with a fair amount of certainty what the business model will be. But a startup is an innovation-based business. And so generally the business model is unproven and it's new. So it's an interesting mindset then to say, well, when you're a startup and when you're founding a startup, your job isn't to build a business, not yet at least. It's to search for a business model that you can repeat and scale and grow really fast. I'll give you a really quick example of one of my favorite scalable businesses. So this is a product called Fishville, which is a little Facebook game created by Zynga, one of the big game companies. And they launched this a long time ago, thinking we'll just have an experiment. We'll see whether people engage with this thing. It's basically an aquarium. So you can control the fish, and there's a starfish, and there's a little Nemo fish, and various other characters. And they decided at one point that they would try to monetize some of the characters. So they allowed users to pay $1 to buy the clownfish, this little stripy character at the top of the screen. And I met the designer who led the creation of the clownfish. So this person's job was to create the clownfish. And there's a designer and there was a software programmer who designed the logic. So when it swam into the edge of the aquarium, it would turn around and swim the other way. And if there was a shark, it would swim a bit faster. And they had a little bit of marketing help to put this into the game. And when they launched it, it was extremely popular. And over a period of time, they sold $29 million worth of clownfish. So to me, this is a really interesting example of this concept of highly scalable products where you make it once and you sell it many times. So this is the antithesis of small businesses. So a small business typically struggles with the fact that you're selling time. If it's your business, then often you'll be selling your time as a consultant or doing whatever the thing is that your business does. There's nothing wrong with that, but you can't make more time. You can only sell a certain number of hours in a day or in a week. Yes, you can employ more people, but you've got to pay them a salary. So that's not a scalable business. Whereas something where you can make a product that can be made once and then sold many times is extremely scalable. So the last comment I'd make on that is really about, again, in the early days of successful companies, it's understanding the distinction between learning and execution. So in the early days of any startup, it's really important to spend time learning about the market, about the needs of your customer, about the competitive landscape to see who else has products out there that might compete with yours, and to do that with the minimum possible investment. So in this chart, the uncertainty, the blue triangle, is decreasing over time because you're learning more about these things, and you're keeping the yellow bars as low as possible. So this is your investment, whether it's your time or your money, or for that matter, anyone else's money. It's saying keep that to an absolute minimum until you learn enough that you can have some confidence about what product to build and who to build it for. You confirm that by running some experiments, and Maren might talk a little bit about some of the things you can do to validate ideas. And then you can execute. And execution is where you say, right, we're really very confident that we've got the right idea, the right product. We know which customer we're going after, and then you can start investing time and money. So I'm going to wrap up there and hand on to Maren, who's going to share a few thoughts about some practical things that you can do early on in the startup journey. And Maren, I'll hand on to you if you want to share your screen, and we'll come back to this at the end.
Okay, can you see my slide?
Nope.
So was that a yes? Oh, sorry. You see it now?
Yes, got it.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Colin. There was so much in what you said. And yeah, well, starting and building a startup can be extremely rewarding, but it's probably also one of the hardest things that you can do. And yeah, admittedly, when you asked me to put together 10 tips, I was like, 10? Like, can I do 100? Because there's really so much that goes into it. And the tips that I have collated and put together are not so much about sort of the operational side of a startup. They don't go too much into, create a marketing plan, etc. It's really what you can do as a founder that can improve your chances of success. I came across a lot of startups in the last 4 years. I was the innovation facilitator at James Cook University, and I've coordinated the innovation and early stage startup programs at the JCU Ideas Lab in Cairns. And then later I joined Tribe Global Ventures, and we're working there specifically with later stage startups. Obviously, aside from providing investment, we help founders to grow personally, but also scale their business. And we do that through founders offsites, but also through international trade missions, specifically to the UK and to the US, where we allow founders to broaden their horizons and find out what lies beyond the Australian market. I've also started and managed a few businesses of my own in various industries, such as hospitality, the textile industry, and I've always also been the co-founder of a marine conservation eco-fashion foundation that's set under a global initiative. We worked with global mega brands such as Adidas, Amex, and the beer brand Corona. And that reminds me, I probably should change the slide. It lets me. Yeah. And aside from that, I'm also the head of marketing and sales of a STEM education business. We work specifically on the mission to get more female students interested and engaged in STEM subjects and STEM careers. Before we dive into the 10 tips that I've put together, I want to give you a mental model that you can use in the future as well. Let's invert the question of what you can do to be more successful and ask yourself, in order to be unsuccessful with your business or idea, what actions or behaviors would I need to engage in? So what actions and behaviors would kill your business? It's an inversion process and can really help us unlock the things that we should be doing or we should be avoiding. So take a pen and paper and just jot that down. I'll give you a minute to come up with a few ideas of what actions and behaviors would kill your business. And that's also a very powerful exercise that you can do in, lots of other areas of your life, not just in business. So once you have your list, you simply invert it and then you do the opposite of what you just wrote down. So let's do the same for the top 10 tips. That's a hard one to get out. The top 10 tips of increasing the success of your business. So my first one is exactly what Colin was talking about with the hair on fire problem. One of the number one reasons early stage startups fail is because there's no need in the market for their product. So it's really critical that you ask yourself, am I solving a real problem that's big enough for people to spend money on a solution? And for people to spend money, the reward has to be perceived to be greater than the sacrifice that they make, such as the time and the effort and the money that they spend on your solution. So I think Colin explained that really well, what a hair on fire problem is. Another example that I can provide is from Vu Tran, co-founder of the Unicorn Go One online learning platform. And he's also a general practitioner working in a GP practice on a regular basis. And he gets asked by founders all the time, or approached by founders all the time, saying, oh my God, Vu, I heard that you still use fax machines to send documents from one clinic to another. I want to revolutionize the healthcare system and introduce a software that simplifies the process. And his response is always, but why? We don't need a software. The fax machine solves the problem really well. We don't need a better solution to communicate between hospitals and GP practices and medical centers. So it's really important that you ask yourself if there's actually a problem to solve. And how do you find that out? Well, the number one way to find that out is to talk to your target audience and really find out if your product or solution or your idea is something that they would put money down for. My second tip is to go small. Another reason startups fail is because they want to be everything to everyone. But if you try to build the ocean from the start, you will kind of cause three things. So firstly, you're at risk of completely overwhelming yourself. If you're looking at a problem that is so huge to tackle alone, there's a risk that you don't really get started with it. Secondly, if you do get started, you will burn through resources really, really fast. And thirdly, you're at risk of building a business that is called a Frankenstein business, which is trying to offer too many solutions for multiple problems to several different market segments. And you end up with a website that's completely confusing and complex, and three different business ideas or solutions that are somewhat related to each other, but just doesn't really make sense to anyone. So my tip is to start small and go niche. And it's really, sort of, I guess, examples here that underline that are, for example, Amazon, didn't start out as a mega online retailer selling everything from children's clothing to headphones. Amazon started as an online bookstore. Facebook started as a communication tool for Harvard students. And Canva started as a photo book editing software for schools. So extremely niche how these three examples started. And they've built their business from there. So a really good rule of thumb to use is to address one problem with one product for one market until you've reached $1 million in revenue, and then you can grow from there. Another mistake that many founders make is that their message is way too complicated. They inhibit customers, so complex messages inhibit customers from making a thorough purchase decision. So most of the time, if you're confused, you won't buy. And you also at risk of work effect and the word of mouth effect that can take place, especially in healthy ecosystems.
You just dropped out there for a few seconds, Maren, but it's booted your slides off.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure you can reshare them.
Share it again. We're back now?
Yep, perfect.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know where you've lost me. So I'll just repeat that. So essentially, if your message is too complex, too complicated, you lose customers, but you also lose that word of mouth and networking effect that takes place in healthy ecosystems. If I don't understand what you do, I can't tell a potential customer or a potential investor or potential partner about your business. So simplify your one-line pitch and absolutely nail it. Be really, really good at your one-line pitch. And in your pitch, don't talk about how you solve the problem. Instead, really focus on the value that you create. So for example, the money that you save, the peace of mind that you create, or the time efficiencies that you introduce to a customer or client. One of my favorite frameworks for messaging is Don Miller's story brand framework. It's a very simple formula using problem, solution, and outcome to formulate your message. And that message can be used whether you are at a networking event or to put on your business card or to put on your landing page of your website. So, and that's a book here. I can really, really recommend that. So an example of the problem, solution, outcome messaging is many parents struggle to know how child-friendly a city or holiday region is. Our Kids Travel app recommends the best hotels, activities, and restaurants based on age so that you can travel with the peace of mind that your holiday will be a hit for everyone. So we start with the problem, we resonate with our target audience, we follow with the solution, we don't go into too much detail how we do it, and we finish with the outcome, which is what usually matters to most of your target audience. Okay, so my next tip is mainly relevant to early stage businesses. As founders start out, they face several challenges. They need to get that very first sale when all they have is a prototype. They need to get a certain volume of sales to validate their business idea, get clarity on pricing, generate content, use cases, but they don't know how to get to that volume of sales. And thirdly, they may be riddled with self-doubt and wonder who would buy their product anyway. So one reason to kill your business, or one way to kill your business before it really kicks off, is to get stuck in that pre-revenue phase. And one thing that can get you unstuck is a technique that is called give before you ask. And that can really help you to obtain feedback, testimonials, surveys, Google reviews, use cases, emails to build audience lists, and improving your value proposition by giving your product away free of charge, not free of value in return. You get all these other things in return, you just don't get money in return. So ask yourself, how can you kickstart your business by giving something for free before you ask for monetary reimbursement? Can you, for example, offer a free trial? Can you provide a free resource? Can you suggest an initial free consultation? And what you will find is that when people are sold on your idea and they feel your generosity, they want to come back for more and they want to leave money with you, but they also want to tell their friends about it. So leading with the give before you ask principle, especially at the very start of kickstarting your business, will enable you to understand your target audience better and whether your products meets their needs. So in other words, if you have product market fit, you're able to create valuable content for your marketing materials. You're able to build social proof by showing future customers who and how many others have used your product or service. And you're also able to build that confidence in yourself. All right, another way, another reason why businesses fail is because founders say yes to too many things and they waste valuable resources such as time and money on literally every opportunity that comes across their desk. And it's really hard when you're at the start of a business. It's really hard to know what do you say yes to and what do you say no to. My tip is to develop a decision-making framework and sticking to it so that you know what to say no to. So an example here is Juliette Murphy from Flat Maps. She has a process with her co-founder where they've mapped out the values, the mission, and the vision of their company in a simple spreadsheet. And any inquiry that comes across their desk, any opportunity that presents, they run through that spreadsheet and they work out whether it's in alignment with their mission, vision, and values. And if it doesn't, they strictly won't touch it. So do your research and look at the different decision-making frameworks that are out there and find one that works for you and one that is aligned with your goals, resources, and your long-term strategy. One of the three things that can cause startups to fail are also the people that are in your team. Many founders make the mistake of hiring for expertise and skills instead of attitude and behavior. And yes, while it's important that you have people on the team that are skilled at what they do and they have the expertise that's required, it's really important that you prioritize attitude and behavior over skills and expertise, because it's much more easy to manage someone's skills, to lift their skills up, rather than managing their behavior or their attitudes or their values if they're not aligned. So when you select people that sit in the boat with you, make sure you build a complementary team with high trust and respect and values that are aligned. And, like the saying goes, hire slow and fire fast will get you further at the start of your business when resources are limited. In regards to co-founders, exactly the same rings true. Skills are important, but alignment of values are more important. So both when you recruit team members or when you look at getting a co-founder on the team, have a look at what are their values? What are their objectives? Like, what is the reason they are there in the business for? Like to Colin's point before, there's different reasons why people start a startup or want to be a part of a startup. And it's really important that you both on the same page. Also have a look how they navigate through difficult situations and how they solve conflict, what their communication style is, and most importantly, ask yourself if you implicitly trust them. All right, now, unsurprisingly, one absolute easy way to kill a business, I don't know if you have put this on your pre-mortem sheet, is running out of cash. Many founders unfortunately lack the financial literacy required to make sense of their accounting reports, and many founders just don't know what numbers to look at and which figures matter. Like, things you should ask yourself are, how long do you have until you've burned through your cash reserves? How much revenue do you need each month to avoid losses? And how long are your sales cycles? And we're not born with financial literacy, and it's unfortunately not something that we necessarily learn at primary or high school. Some of us learn it at university, but not many of us. So it's really important to make sure that your financial literacy skills are polished and you know exactly which numbers matter to your business. All right, now tip number 8 is one I think that many founders struggle with. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you like the selling part of running a business. The truth is, there's many founders that just have such a problem selling their product. But the truth is that you have to sell yourself and you have to sell your idea all the time if you want to be successful. Unfortunately, selling has a negative connotation for many, and we don't want to be that pushy salesperson. But it's really important that you flip your mindset on that and that you become somewhat of a sales machine and that you find an approach that feels comfortable to you. And if you're not comfortable with selling, then really ask yourself why. Because if you're genuinely offering a solution to a serious problem, you really would want to tell everyone about it. Like, if you had a solution to that hair on fire problem, you would want the world to know. If you had a cure for cancer, you would want everyone to know about that. So if you do have an intrinsic problem selling your product, then it's a bit of a filter whether you're actually solving a real product or whether your product/solution is as good as you think it is. One book, so there's another book recommendation here. One book I can recommend is Alex Hormozi's $100 Million Leads. It's written in a really easy to understand way. It's somewhat inspirational and really does flip your mindset on selling. And highly recommend that you listen to it on an audio book or you get a copy of it. All right, another action or behavior that kills many businesses is the lack of action that founders take. So a lot of founders are at every single networking event, they participate in lots of courses, they get all the advice they can, but they just don't execute on it. And Colin, I'm sure you can attest to that. But a successful founder doesn't just talk the talk, they walk the walk. So it's really important that you don't get stuck on your plans and you get stuck on your idea. You actually implement them. So you've got to, excuse the French, you have to get shit done. You have to become an operator and you have to work on the things that matter and do it consistently. And the emphasis here is really on the stuff that matters. Like, many founders, they're always busy. They're working 10 hours a day, but they're just not really getting anywhere. And they think that they're working on the stuff that matters, but it's not actually really the stuff that matters. So focus on quality and quantity when you put that work in. And it comes back to being focused. So use your decision-making framework and know which numbers matter, because that will keep you on a straight line. And then my final tip comes back to you as a founder. Like, what do you think is more important to your business or idea? Is it the idea, or is it you as a founder? Well, of course, it's you as the founder that is more crucial than the idea. Again, to Colin's other slide, the idea can be fantastic, can be crazy, it can be great, it can be the intercept of it. But if you as a founder can't execute, you can't deliver, if you're struggling to steer the ship, then it's pretty worthless to have the best idea on the planet. So my last tip for you is work on yourself as much as you are working on the business, and the way you do that is actively investing both time, so schedule it in your calendar, and investing money into coaching, mentoring, offsites, other programs that might help you along, but also, a standard routine of having self-help books that you listen to, and content that you expose yourself to. So what does working on yourself entail? Firstly, develop a growth mindset, become comfortable with the thought that you never stop growing, and the way your business is constantly morphing and changing, and the problems are changing in your business, the way you have to morph and change and improve and grow as well. Know your strengths and weaknesses. Know your personality style, because that can really inform your modus operandi. It can inform how you solve through problems. And also identifying what blockers and hurdles you have that might, get thrown into the way, and find out how you can work through them. So do you have a tendency to self-sabotage? Do you procrastinate? Do you harbor a lot of self-doubt? What are the biggest fears that you're facing when you run your business? And work through them actively. Another one is, and probably the most important one here as well, is make sure you're ultra clear what fills your cup at the end of the day. How do you recharge your battery? How do you make sure you're not burning out? How do you get balance in your life? What are the activities that give you peace instead of pressure? So do that. Spend that time and money on making sure that you put that oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on your business or others in your life. And that will be, very crucial for the sustainable success of your business. And that's it. Those are my 10 tips for you as someone who's got a new idea, or starting out a business, or is growing a business. So yeah, very keen to get into a bit of a Q&A.
Thanks, Maren. That was really awesome. Lots of good stuff to reflect on there. While people are entering some questions in the Q&A, I'll just remind everyone that there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, so feel free to jump in there with any questions. I'm going to ask you one that actually someone asked me this morning. I thought it's probably one of the most commonly asked ones from early stage startup founders. And it's about how to fund your company. So can you talk a little bit about what are some of the strategies that people should use, and maybe even some of the myths around, do you have an idea for a startup and go raise money from investors? Do you get customers first? Do you go and borrow money from the bank? What are some of the thoughts that people should have around funding their company in the early days?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to fund your company, and probably the most common one is for founders to bootstrap their business, and then probably start relying on money from friends or family to build their business once they've validated that there is something there. Personally, I think the best way to, and I know I probably shouldn't say this being part of a venture capital firm, but personally, I think there is a lot of value in getting your business to a place where it can sustain itself through the revenue that comes from customers, and then using money from investors through private equity as you're growing your company if you really need it. There's definitely a lot of benefits and advantages seeking money from venture capital. Sorry, seeking venture capital from investors. But it also comes with complexities. And whilst, many investors provide great insights and advice and really get their hands dirty working on your business, there is a risk that you don't necessarily have that positive experience. So yeah, I guess those three, plus we would probably add grants and I guess government support as a fourth element in how you fund a business. But it's really important for founders to I suppose both have that conversation, have a look for themselves what is the right way of funding their business, depending on the industry that they're in and the business model that they have, and then seeking advice on what works best for them.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I was talking to someone very recently about actually borrowing money personally from the bank to fund their business. And everyone should make their own decisions about things. It's not for you or me to tell them to not borrow money from the bank. But I kind of said to them, well, just think about it this way. Your business is one opportunity that's going to take maybe several years to see whether it's a success or a failure. So your portfolio size is one. So investing, going and borrowing money, like, and putting maybe your house up or other assets up as security is a pretty risky move. Whereas if you talk to investors, they might have a portfolio of 10 or 20 investments, or in some cases a lot more than that. So they can afford for some of those investments to fail. Whereas if you've got a business and it's the one business that you're pursuing, you can't really afford for that to fail and for you to risk your house or other assets. So I just encourage people to think hard before they borrow against their home. Um, Another question that's come through frequently is around technical co-founders. And I guess we're getting broaden the question to not just people who might help you with building a software product, but anyone who's got kind of really specific skill sets, whether it's digital marketing or helping to build a physical product, engineering skills or whatever it might be. What's your advice for anyone who says, right, there's a person that I'd really like to bring into my business, in terms of how to bring that person in and motivate them? Do you offer them equity? Do you try and find people that are really really experienced and you're going to pay them a salary from the beginning? What are the kind of best practice concepts around bringing in those kind of technical skills?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely essential to make sure that you have a complementary team and that you probably want to avoid being a solo founder if you can, because it again kind of diversifies the risk. The burden's not just all on you as a founder, and investors often favor teams that have a co-founder in the mix and definitely have that technical knowledge in the mix. I mean, ideally you want to pay them good money, but I think the truth is, especially early stage startups, you just don't have that cash flow. You just don't have those cash reserves to pay, a decent remuneration package to a technical founder. I think it depends a little bit on the individual. It's definitely very common to exchange skills for what's called sweat equity. So they work in the business. They don't draw a wage or a salary, but they do have a stake in the business. They own a percentage of the business, and that can be very well a model that works, especially at the early stages of the company, until you generate enough revenue for the business to sustain yourself and your co-founder or any other technical people in the mix. I think there is also, depending on the level of involvement, there is also opportunities to approach people with technical skills to see if they're willing to do some work on more of a short-term basis or more of a contract basis, so that you do get that expertise and you can see whether the shoe fits or it doesn't. And it costs you, a smaller lump sum amount rather than sort of a regular wage, which can also feel a little bit less daunting, especially at the start of a business.
Yeah, for sure. Probably last question before we run out of time, but so a question about when to know that your idea is not working. So you talked about your whole presentation was about a pre-mortem and thinking about what are the things that could go wrong, and then using that knowledge and that insight to help you to avoid them going wrong. So that's a good framework. But how do people know if really it's just not working out? What are there any tips you can offer to help people to say, all right, look objectively, is this working or is it not? If it is, what great. If it's not, what do I do?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and I think it's something that not enough early stage founders are critical enough and honest enough to kind of know when to pull the pin. And as much as it's always reinforced, you got to be resilient, you got to keep pushing, you have to get up again. I think it's just as important to know when are you wasting energy and resources in something that is just not taking off. Personally, I'm a strong believer, coming from a marketing and sales background, I'm a strong believer that you have to run your idea by the people that are supposed to buy it. So, do your focus groups, run your tests, give before you ask, let people try your prototype, run the idea by them, find out how much money they would be willing to pay for if they had to pay for it. And really listen to that feedback, like really try and filter out an idealistic response that you want to hear, and be really critical and honest to yourself. When the answer is, yeah, look, it's a nice to have, but I probably wouldn't really buy it, then it sort of is a time after some tweaking and pivoting, and you might try a different market segment and you might try to adjust your product. If you keep getting the same response, that there's just no stickiness in your product, there's just no product market fit, as much as it may feel like a defeat and it may feel like a failure, you're actually better off and stronger for pulling the pin and saying, look, it was an attempt and we didn't succeed, and we are going to move on with something else, and we're smarter now to preserve the resources that we have left, rather than wasting more time and money and effort into this.
Yeah, I really like that. The concept of fast failure. There's a term that that I like called learning. If you've come across learning, it's a combination of failing and learning. So it's this idea that if your product fails or your initial idea fails, that's fine, because it's just telling you some more, it's giving you some more information, right? So you're learning about what the market wants, what your target customer wants, and it gives you an opportunity, if you do that kind of learning and feedback cycle quickly and efficiently, hopefully it'll give you lots of opportunities to pivot and change your idea, change your product, change your your target customer, or do something different. So the thing that worries me most is when I see people that have spent years of their life, and you and I both know some of these people, Maren, who've spent years of their life working on one idea, despite really not getting that kind of positive feedback from their target customer. So that's something that I think is really important. I think we do have time for one more question. There's one more question here in the chat, which is, do you have a framework on how to identify your ideal customer?
Yeah, that's a good one. I guess you can look at it from two sides. Either you know what the problem is that you're solving for, and you do your research to find out which particular person or customer segment has this problem. For example, if you're developing a software for accounting firms, or a software to simplify the accounting process, you narrow it down. Who are these people that have problems with the current status of the accounting softwares that are out there? And again, you probably want to niche it and find a really niche market in there. Then you can ask yourself, am I looking to build a product that is more customer focused, or am I building a product that is more business focused? And you find your niche within that. The other way you can look at it is you want to target a particular group of people, and you find out what problem does this particular group of people have. So if you're passionate about, I don't know, e-commerce, you might find out what a certain problem is that people who shop a lot online potentially have. So for example, it's really hard to try on clothing when you shop online. It's really hard to know whether clothing fits you accurately. So you develop you almost reverse engineer the problem based on the people that you want to market to. It's definitely easier to go the first way around though, and start with the problem, identify the problem, and then work out which people in the market have that particular problem, and research and having conversations, just talking to people, having those those conversations and being a detective and finding out what is needed, what is the market screaming for.
Yeah, totally. I think that's so important. And actually, there's a really good blog post. I'll dig it up and include it when we post this recording of this video on the website. But there's a really good blog post by Rahul Vahora, who's the founder of Superhuman. So Superhuman's an email client for it's intended for power email users. People who send large numbers of emails every day, and they're kind of they need a really really efficient email client. Anyway, what he did was early on in that company's journey, they had some users, but he sent out a survey to all of their existing users at that time, and he asked a bunch of questions about what do you like, what do you not like about our product, and so on. But then the key one in the survey was a question that said, if tomorrow we turned off access to our product on a scale of 1 to 10, how angry would you be? And what they found was that the people who responded with a 9 or a 10 were the best customers because they really, really liked using the product. And it was basically a decision for the company at that point to say, in all of our marketing activities from this point onwards, we're only going to go after that sort of person. And they did some refining of their survey to see if they could find out what jobs they did and what kind of organizations they worked in and what their kind of personality style was. And it allowed them to say, well, right, we're only going to try and sell our product to people who would be a 9 or a 10 out of 10 on the angry scale if we took away our product tomorrow. So I think it's an interesting one if you've got users or if you've got people that you can send surveys to.
Yeah, and it kind of comes back to that, find your niche market and start small, because the smaller the segment, the more similar characteristics they have. And so you can identify those easier. You know their behaviors, their psychological reasons why they're buying the product or want the product. And you can firstly tailor your communications and your marketing efforts to really speak to that segment and resonate with that segment.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Mm.
We are just about out of time. I would like to very quickly share one more thing, and I will just invite everyone to, if you haven't already, to get on the Startup On-Ramp website and have a look at our Female Founders program. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are supported by the Queensland Government through the Advanced Queensland Initiative, and that's allowed us to make available individual founder mentoring, our online founders course, which is a video-based self-paced course that covers many of the topics that we've touched on in this session, and also our Female Founders Pre-Accelerator, which is an 8-week online mentor-led incubator program. And the next one of those is getting underway in February next year, and we're accepting expressions of interest for that. So all of these programs are fully funded by the Queensland Government, so we're very pleased to be able to offer them. So as I said, if you haven't already, I'd encourage you to go to startuponramp.com or scan the QR code and have a look at those programs and make use of them. So having said that, we will wrap this up. I'd like to thank Maren hugely for some great insights. That's been really valuable, Maren. Thanks for joining this discussion.
Thanks for having me. It was my pleasure.
And thanks everyone for being here. If you've got any other questions about our programs, all of our contact details will be in the email that will come out to you shortly. And I look forward to speaking to you all soon.